Welcome back to another Web Dev Podcast episode where we help aspiring developers get jobs and junior developers grow. In this one, if you have any fears of ChatGPT, any fears of AI, about you becoming a developer, is it going to overtake your jobs? This is a concern that Byron shared. He reached out to me and he did have that concern initially. And then when he started using AI and integrating it into his professional workflow, his perspective changed. So I brought him on to talk about that. Byron actually did an episode a while back, Treehouse review episode. So I appreciate him coming back on. But yeah, Byron, go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit.
Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, my name is Byron. I'm a full stack software engineer. I work in New York for an aviation services company. I'm working front end, back end, doing some database stuff as well. Primarily, I work with JavaScript, so Node.js on the back end, React.js on the front end. And recently we started moving to TypeScript as well. So yeah, I have a lot of fun with JavaScript basically.
Very cool. Okay, so an actual full stack position.
Yeah.
Do you find that, I'm just curious, do you find that you lean more on the front end or back end with the work you do?
Honestly, it's pretty much 50-50, like right down the middle, because there's some days I'm just working on like an API. There's no like visual aspect to it at all. And then there's some days where it's just front end only. There's a lot of CSS, a lot of styling and, making things look good. So yeah, it's 50-50. And I actually like that because there are days when you kind of get tired of doing just one thing. And so you can take a break and then, shift focus, change gears, do something else. When you get sick of, banging your head against the wall doing CSS. So.
Sure. Good for you. Actually, that would have been my ideal position. I think it's a little bit rare to get that 50-50 with a full stack and even to get a full stack position. A lot of companies specialize, so a little jealous, but that's awesome. So yeah, I think, how do we start this off? I think I kind of just want to get a feel for, okay, so, ChatGPT was introduced. AI has been around for a long time, and we've had different AI tools for developers in general, but none have gained the popularity and have had the impact that ChatGPT has in terms of just pretty much what we're talking about in tech right now and how we potentially think it's going to impact tech. So you started off with this concern. What's going to happen with AI? Start us there.
Yeah, so I guess when ChatGPT started coming on the scene, immediately a lot of developers on YouTube, all over the internet, Stack Overflow, Reddit, they were posting stuff about how they're afraid that it's going to replace, tech jobs and everything. And I think initially a lot of it was maybe fear mongering. People didn't really understand the entire extent of how it was going to work. There was a lot of speculation, and maybe that kind of created this hysteria of just fear, around it. And I think that's how I felt as well, watching all of these videos. I started doing my own research as well without actually having used ChatGPT myself, at the time. And my own opinion, just based on everything I was hearing, was this could be, bad for me, for a lot of other engineers. Some of my friends who were in, college or doing boot camps to get programming roles. And over time, as we've seen how it actually works, and after having used it myself, the perspective has changed quite a bit on what its actual impact will be. And so I think that was just like a paradigm shift, honestly, after having used it. And then also talking to, other people, talking to colleagues in my company, talking to our senior developer, our team leader, basically. His opinion was, right from the start, it's not going to take away your job or my job. It's more going to be a tool that's going to help all of us do things better and faster. And I think his prediction so far has been pretty accurate, after having, gotten some experience with it myself. But given that, I think there is still potential that because fewer engineers are able to do things faster, it will decrease the amount of engineers you need to do something. Maybe you would have a company where you were having some very junior developer do some very basic task. I think that type of task could be automated through something like ChatGPT very easily. You could give it a prompt, and especially as you get better and better with it, understanding what exactly you need to tell it to get the right type of code or right type of feedback from it. I think that has the potential to kind of maybe decrease the amount of engineers you need.
I think that's a very realistic take. So when you mention like YouTubers are talking about this topic and the fear mongering, I've seen two extreme examples. On one side, ChatGPT is going to take all of our jobs. Tech is just fucked. Like replacing all software engineers. It's going to replace me. It's going to replace you. The fear mongering gets so many views. It gets so many views, and it attracts and there were big content creators doing this, big content creators that are just new, and you'll see, if you look at their channels, you'll see a pattern. Every single new technology framework that comes out, React is dead, this is dead, those are a particular type of content creator, and they're gaming the algorithm. That's fine. But there's another extreme where people will have no acknowledgement of how it's actually going to integrate with software engineering teams. And that this idea that, yes, it's going to make software engineers faster. So of course, it's probably going to raise the bar and replace some tasks that very low junior engineers could have done. And so maybe we shouldn't be giving the advice, oh yeah, this isn't going to affect software engineering jobs at all. Right. And so in my opinion, give the advice to a lot of aspiring developers, the bar is just going to rise, right? A lot of the education you're receiving, you're probably just going to have to extend the time and continue doubling down. And there are tons of ways to stand out, but it does impact us. And like you said, I think it will reduce a few positions. Low code solutions was a big push that replaced some junior positions. If all you know how to do is build a landing page, low code solutions can do that. Website builders can do that. That, quite frankly, that's the real answer to that. So it raises the bar. So you're giving a realistic situation of what's kind of your vision of it. So anyways, yeah, I vibe with it, but I'm really interested to hear how you've actually been utilizing ChatGPT.
Sure. So I have one, very specific example, which I'm going to pull up on my screen. I'll just walk you through it. So I mentioned, we started using TypeScript recently, and even though all of us did go through, a basic TypeScript primer, learning the basics of it, there's a lot of stuff that we're still figuring out because it's a new paradigm. It's a new, I guess, it's an enhancement of JavaScript with, a lot of stuff that you have to just learn through experience. And so there's a lot of just learning, figuring out, going to Stack Overflow and learning new stuff. So there was one thing I wanted to try to do with TypeScript, which was, and I'm going to get a bit technical here, which is you can create an interface, which is basically like a type that you want your object to follow, and it'll have some properties. And I wanted to create an array that could only have properties from that type, from that interface. And I was trying to find this answer on Stack Overflow and whatever forums I could go to. And for some reason, I just was not able to, find the answer of how I was going to do this. And I decided to give ChatGPT a shot. And this was the first time I actually ever used it, for coding at least. And so I formulated a question, step by step, very, very explicitly. And I can read out, exactly what I said. It was, I have a TypeScript interface defined as interface FHL, which is, the name. And I want to create an array that can only have values that exist as keys of that interface. How can I do this in TypeScript? And I gave basically a small code snippet of my interface, what it looks like. And then the response that I got from ChatGPT was actually exactly what I needed. And this was something I had been trying to find out, on Stack Overflow, on other forums for about half an hour. And it gave me the right answer, in a couple minutes. So I think this kind of opened my eyes to how powerful it is and how I could use it, which is that there are use cases where you may not be able to find something on Stack Overflow. You know, you're only going to find something you're looking for on forums if someone previously asked that. And if what you're asking, you know, matches whatever they asked, how they asked it. But in the case that you can't find, you know, a question that someone else already asked, you can try asking that to ChatGPT. And if you ask in a way that it understands what you're trying to, you know, get, it will be able to give you almost exactly what you need, which was, you know, the answer that I ended up getting. And so after this instance, you know, I started trying to find other ways that I could use it. I started asking it more and more questions, even times when I kind of had the answer from other resources. I wanted to try to see how well or what type of answer I could get from, you know, ChatGPT. And I guess since then, you know, I've used it for about a month now. And overall, my experience has kind of been a mixed bag. There are times when I'm able to get, you know, almost a perfect answer, which fits my use case completely. But there are other instances where it's giving me information that is either outdated or it's just inaccurate for some reason. I don't know where it even gets the answer that it gives me sometimes. But yeah, you know, there are basically times that it works and times that it doesn't. And then one other thing I'll mention is there are some answers it gives where it's using very bad software engineering practices. So it's basically giving like a for loop where it could be using a hash map, you know, which would be significantly faster. You know, if you're into like, you know, the big O notation and everything, trying to make your code run as fast as possible. If you're a junior developer, you know, you could ask it for some type of code. It may give you something that works, but it may work extremely slow. And I think you would have to have either the knowledge or the experience to know, okay, this is not the best solution. You know, I can either improve this or I just got to make up my own solution. So yeah, I think that's kind of generally my experience with it.
Okay, cool. I have some questions. So,
Sure.
That's, I think what you just touched on with that last part, I agree. I think it can you're going to encounter situations where you kind of have to know a little bit to know if it's accurate, or if it's giving you the most efficient answer, right? And I think that's where it really benefits professional software engineers. I can kind of like, I can't find anything on Stack Overflow, just like kind of get me almost there. And okay, now I know where we're going, and I'm going to go ahead and take whatever you gave me. I'm going to make it more efficient, or I'm going to like, it gives you, it unblocks you, right? That's how I've used it. I think it's been very helpful in that sense, but it helps to have that, like a good chunk of knowledge previously to at least understand the context of the question that you're asking. If you just have no idea and you're just trying to get it to write code, good luck getting it to or verifying that it's actually going to give you the code you want, because sometimes it is inaccurate. That's true. And you need to validate that and test that. But my question for you, I have two questions. What model do you use right now? 3.5 or 4?
I believe it's supposed to be the one that was updated in March. I don't know. Is
it free or is it paid?
It's free. I'm using the free version.
Gotcha.
So it's probably yeah.
So I think it's 3.5. I could be wrong. Okay. Correct me if in the comments, but that's much more inaccurate than 4.
Okay.
So for $20 a month, you can pay for it and get the 4, and it's much more accurate. I don't know if it's worth it to you, but just anyone else watching. Right. You mentioned this idea of sometimes it'll give an answer that it doesn't have great conventions. And like you said, uses a for loop when there's something more efficient. What if you, in the prompt, specified that efficiency and speed was the priority? Do you think you could get ChatGPT to give you a more efficient answer?
So that actually did happen. There was one time where I had asked it for a filter, basically. It was an array filter. And it ended up giving me an answer. This is very specific to React. So it was basically using a non-state variable, which means it was going to calculate this filter every single time the code ran. you can memorize the solution so that it's only running, when specific variables in the app are changing their value. So when it gave me the first answer, I told it, no, I need something that is not going to calculate with, on every single render. I need something more efficient. And so it went back and then it changed it to a memoized solution, which was, much more efficient. And this is something I could have done myself, honestly, but I just decided to ask it to see if it was able to, come up with a solution itself. And yeah, it was able to. So yeah, there are times when you kind of have to go back and forth a couple of times. It'll give you a piece of code. It may not be exactly what you need, and you can give it some feedback to help it improve its answer. So I think there's definitely value in that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know. That's my experience as well. So I was kind of just curious. We're going to make some estimations that you don't have to have an accurate response with, but I'm kind of just curious what your opinion is. In 1 year, how do you see ChatGPT impacting software engineers? Is it more integrated? Is it actually replacing more software engineers? Do you see like the adoption not taking off? Like the, low code solutions, there was a big excitement about it, but a lot of companies didn't adopt it. A lot of companies wanted customizations and really leaned on their traditional engineering teams. So in 1 year, how do you see it impacting software engineers?
So I guess I will say, I think it's not going to replace high level, or at least mid-level engineering jobs. I think the biggest impact it'll have are on, like we discussed, the very junior basic positions. Because I think my biggest takeaway has been, if you have no programming knowledge at all or experience, you're not going to be able to do anything with ChatGPT. Like, you could ask it to give you code, but if you don't even understand how that code works, there's very little you can actually do with it. And this is compounded by the fact that even if it does give you code, you still have to deploy it. You still have to, host it, get it running somehow. You still have to integrate it with like a database. There's so much more behind the scenes of getting an app up and running, which ChatGPT cannot do for you. You're going to have to figure that out by yourself. So I feel like someone with a base level of knowledge, will be able to use ChatGPT in a way that's useful, like as a learning tool as well, filling in the gaps of what you don't know. But you can't use it without any knowledge at all. So because of that, I think, the biggest impact, again, will be on just the very junior level developers, in the sense that it'll take away some of that more repetitive work that they would be doing. A mid-level developer would be able to use ChatGPT to do that work instead of having like a junior developer do it. And so I think like in the next year, especially with what you mentioned, like the paid version of ChatGPT is, much more accurate, obviously. So that tool in the hands of, let's say, 3 mid-level developers, it could enable them to do the work of potentially a couple junior level developers. And then, obviously replace their jobs in that sense. And then, 10, 20 years down the road, depending on how accurate and how much more it's able to do, maybe you'll get to a time where you're able to give it a prompt and it's able to write, multiple files worth of code for you, which I don't think it currently can do that. Maybe eventually that'll happen and it'll replace the mid-level jobs as well. But at least for the foreseeable future, I think it's going to be a very useful tool, instead of something that's, outright replacing us.
I appreciate the honesty. So, junior developer, it's an interesting title. When I was trying to become a developer, I landed a position with the title of UI engineer. And it's my first developer position. They knew it was my first developer position. No junior in the title. I think I got paid like $74,000 to start in Chicago. I probably could have negotiated a little bit higher, but I was pretty happy with that start. And then I remember I dove into it, did a lot of HTML and CSS because I was working with Django, and I just, me and my boss kind of built out the front end. And sometimes we'd mess with like filters with Python a little bit, but like it was mainly HTML and CSS. Then I started dabbling in JavaScript, and there was a React portion. It was essentially where you could buy products. That was our React portion. It created a really good process for going through a bunch of different steps. And so then I started managing a lot of that. And so I'd build out full-fledged features, right? I became a little bit more independent as a junior developer. And then we switched to WordPress, which is eventually why I quit, because I wanted to stick with JavaScript. And I felt like, I kind of took the reins on that, and I built some features out. I learned what I needed to with WordPress. I dove into PHP, and I had to manage the backend. And I still I didn't get enough time to really dive deep into it, but I took that initiative. And in my opinion, when you start shifting from dependent to becoming more independent and having the autonomy and taking ownership of certain things, I think that's where you start kind of transitioning into a mid-level. That's my own opinion. But I remember I quit, and then I went to a second position where heavy React, heavy JavaScript. And I went in thinking, man, I deserve a lot of money. I've been really busting my butt. I'm really damn good with JavaScript. And I remember getting to the interview, and granted, I was nervous. I didn't perform as well because I used to get anxiety with interviews, but I was really humbled when I finally got that offer and I joined the team, and I'm like, wow, these engineers are brilliant. They know JavaScript through and throughout. I thought I knew it, not even close. So then I started slowly with like a series of You Don't Know JS, and I started kind of upgrading my knowledge. And but I was humbled because they basically, all of them considered me a junior. I'm like, that's crazy. I've had like a year of experience. I've learned all this stuff, and I'm still a junior. That's crazy. And I eventually accepted it, and I appreciated them being very honest about it. And so I felt like I wouldn't have labeled myself as a mid-level engineer until towards the end of that position and in my third position. So I've realized this title of junior developer, it's a range. You can be tackling really simple tasks as a junior developer, and you can also start taking some ownership, building some features of your own, getting more comfortable with JavaScript, getting more comfortable with CSS, and I've heavily focused on front end. But you could still be considered a junior engineer, and different companies are going to have different bars going forward. So I've realized there's a range of where you can fall as a junior engineer, and just because you're in your second position does not mean you're not a junior engineer. So my challenge to you is, and I kind of want to see where you draw the line in the sand, when you say it's going to start replacing junior engineers, what are some of the tasks that it's going to replace? Because do you believe that it's going to replace all junior engineers, or just kind of ones just starting out, being able to build basic landing pages, maybe just basic components with React? Where's that line in the sand for you?
Sure. So yeah, I really appreciate what you said about this spectrum of where you can be as a junior developer. And I completely agree. I think there are junior developers who could be very advanced and just be, for whatever reason, just be considered junior developers, either because of the company structure, the skill level of other engineers in the company, or, just the company's own approach towards hiring and, mentoring engineers to becoming more senior level. I think my own take on, what I was talking about as far as the types of junior developers it's going to replace, it's more at the very, very basic level of tasks. For example, if someone at my company, for example, wanted a very basic HTML page, I feel like that's something we could tell ChatGPT to do for us. And that's maybe a task that a very green junior developer may have been doing before. I think that type of task could be replaced, because my own, experience with the type of code, at least with the version that I'm using, it oftentimes resembles the work of a very early on junior developer. At least that's what I feel like. There are some mistakes, some bugs that you can take a look at and you can fix them and improve it. I feel like, someone with no experience who's just starting their very first job, maybe that would be the equivalent to something you can get from ChatGPT. If you give it the right prompt, obviously. So I think something like, that is where I see the biggest impact. On the flip side, you have a junior developer who has good experience, they've learned the ropes, they're able to, come up with good, efficient solutions as opposed to just using like a for loop to solve every problem. I feel like that type of engineer would still have more value over a tool than ChatGPT. Obviously, there's a much higher cost associated with it. $20 a month for ChatGPT versus, $70,000, $80,000 for an engineer like that. But, I guess that's where it's going to come down to, what the company itself would prefer. Would they be willing to spend that extra money to train and build up a new engineer who can provide more value maybe in the long run, as opposed to just using ChatGPT for the same purpose?
Yeah, I think that's a choice a lot of companies are going to have to make. You don't have to share it if you feel it's private, but what's the mindset of your company? Is your company very progressive in the sense that it's very open to adopting this technology, given that it can do the tasks at hand efficiently? Do you think other companies are going to be pretty open to that? Or do you kind of see software engineering teams leaning more towards being a little bit more avoidant of it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the interesting thing about the company I work at is before I joined, they were actually using a no-code or low-code solution from Microsoft, which is called Power Apps. And their own experience with it was that even though it was a tool that allowed you to come up with solutions very easily and quickly, the programs and the apps itself were very inefficient. They were very slow. And this is why they decided to hire some engineers and build out actual web apps, which were performant and efficient. So because of that experience, I feel like they appreciate being able to use these tools to automate certain tasks. There's still some like no code apps that the company uses, which just didn't need to be redone by the engineering team because they just work fine. But they understand that there are some apps which you're not going to be able to get the same level of performance that you would where it's actually engineered from the ground up by an engineering team as opposed to just some no-code, low-code solution. So because of that, I think they treat ChatGPT as a tool that we're going to use to get the stuff done faster, as opposed to now we can just fire our whole engineering team, and use ChatGPT instead. But on the flip side, I think there are companies, and I keep, seeing this in the news, where company X has decided to fire X% of their company and replace it with ChatGPT, So there are examples of that happening a lot. I think maybe given the current economy, maybe it's more appealing to cut costs at whatever corner possible. Maybe that has, some impact on it. But I honestly don't know. I think it's probably 50-50. I think some companies are going to stick by their engineers and, some are going to try to save as much money as they can.
It's hard to look into the future and expect that. It's new, and I'm very curious of how often it's going to be adopted into companies and how far companies are going to go with it. I don't know. I'm going to pay attention to it. I'm really interested in it. I use it for my day-to-day. I use it for my business. I'm hoping, quite frankly, ChatGPT can prevent me from having to ever, not ever, but hire people for as long as I possibly can. It's a huge responsibility. And I think it's incredibly helpful. I would, so here's kind of my hesitation of why I think it's not going to be adopted for a while. I'm very curious how they can afford the hardware on $20 a month per user. That feels super cheap to be able to do some of the things that it does. And I noticed that inputs and outputs are very limited. It'd be interesting for them to take like the entire code base, especially of a professional application, learn the conventions, right? All like that's the big thing, being able to scale an application with consistent conventions and proper documentation. Everyone's following the right rules. Like, if it could take in much larger inputs and interpret that before it ever spits out any code and it learns from the software engineers, I would see that as a bit of a red flag. I'd be much more concerned about it really taking over, but the input is very much limited. I don't think it does an amazing, especially like how do you figure out different, like you're never going to have 100% consistent conventions across the code base. And so like, how do you figure out like what's kind of like the main convention, and like, how does it judge like the average amount of efficiency for this parts, like the core components of the code base versus like, what about these other parts that aren't as important, that don't need to be as efficient? How do you tell ChatGPT to prioritize stuff like that? I feel like if it's going to be like, if it's actually going to replace a full developer, it needs to be able to have all this other context and all this other business context that's, you know, that really solidifies and drives the scalability of an application in a way where software engineers can all be on board with it on a team. So thankfully, that gives me a lot of hope that it's not just going to completely take over any positions in the near future. But yeah. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That's been my experience as well. Like the amount of input you can give it. I can't copy an entire JavaScript file, you know, from my React project and just paste it and then tell it to find a bug or to optimize it. I think the last time I tried it, it gave me some output, which is the input is too long. And it wasn't able to do anything with it. So I think that's a huge point. The input is very limited. And then, even if the input was larger, I feel like, copying file by file and then telling it to either make revisions or change stuff, I don't think that would be very efficient as a process itself. I will say there is one use case which I found very useful, which I didn't mention earlier, which is I've been taking like sections of code when I'm writing a new function in React, for example, and asking ChatGPT to write automated tests for me. So before I was writing the test myself, it's able to come up with tests which are very good. And that's something I don't enjoy doing so much myself, writing tests anyway. So that's a task that I guess, this goes back to the whole junior developer thing. This is maybe a task that a junior developer could be doing, writing tests, making sure that some code is working as it should. So this is something I'm able to use ChatGPT for, writing tests and then running the tests to see if they're passing and everything. But yeah, going back to your point, until it's able to study an entire code base and figure out the conventions, figure out all of the different ways that the code integrates and works together, you will still need some human to guide it, and help it to use it basically, until it can do that on its own or have some way where you can train it, I think, that's a big limitation, honestly. And then, like I mentioned earlier, you still need to deploy all of your code and have it running. Something like AWS requires a lot of configuration. So you still need someone doing that. So yeah, I think there are a lot of limitations currently, which maybe in the future they would be able to overcome. But as of now, I guess it's good for developers for now. Okay.
I think that's a really fair take. And I have been avoiding writing tests for my own application. You just gave me the solution for it. I think that's a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to implement it. So I'm going to challenge you with one more question, and we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Curious of your opinion with this. How can aspiring developers use ChatGPT to help them grow?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, first of all, any developer, in 2023 needs to have a very solid foundation in like basic software engineering. Have a good understanding of like data structures and algorithms, to set yourself apart from, a very large majority of someone who graduated from a boot camp, for example. They will most typically not have that knowledge. So even if you are someone who didn't go to, a 4-year software engineering college, and you just did either self-learning from Treehouse or you went to some boot camp, supplement your knowledge with these basics in software engineering, and that'll give you a really big advantage over like a lot of other boot camp graduates and people who are trying to get into the industry like yourself. That's one. Once you have those basics,
let me pause there. How do you use ChatGPT to learn those basics?
To learn those basics.
Can it create a course? Have you ever tried just having it like create a tutorial for you for something that you didn't understand or anything like that?
Well, I will say this. I had asked it to, because I do a lot of these like programming questions. They're like challenges, which are basically to learn, get better at algorithms and everything. And instead of going to, lead code where I usually go, I told ChatGPT, can you give me some JavaScript coding challenge? And it, instead of giving me the actual challenge, it just gave me like a very lukewarm description of what the challenge would be. And that was pretty much useless for me, So, on lead code, it gives you a very detailed question, and then it helps you have like tests to see if your answer was correct and how performant it was.
Do you think you could create the prompt to be able to do that though?
Maybe. Yeah. I guess it might be able to find some question on the internet, and just give it to you, or maybe even come up with some variation of it. So I have not tried that. I guess it might be something worth digging into. But yeah, I suppose, that's actually an idea. Maybe you could prompt it to give you questions that can, which you try to solve on your own. And then once you can't, I guess, or once you do solve it, you can ask it for the correct answer or something. That's something I'll actually try after I interview.
Okay.
To see what type of results I can get with it.
Okay. I was just curious because I'm not great with data structures and algorithms. I'm just not. I never have been. And if I ever needed to be, I'd probably try it out with ChatGPT. So I was just curious if you did. But sorry, I did interrupt you. You were going to mention a couple other things.
No problem. So I guess once you have those basics, however you go about learning them, whether it's YouTube videos, if that's what you're into, or, getting a book, if you're still okay with reading a book. Or then, something like lead code where you are just trying out different problems and, it gives you an explanation for the right approach as well to some programming questions and everything. Once you have those basics and you start, I guess, building out your own projects, I think that's where ChatGPT can really help you, because in the past, maybe you would be on Stack Overflow, or you'd be reading some forum, or you'd be following some YouTube tutorial. I think with ChatGPT, if you have an idea, you can just ask ChatGPT to help you wherever you get stuck. So if you're building some, to-do app or something, and you have a basic idea of what you want to build, I think whereas before you would be following a tutorial and, following it step by step, maybe now you can start with whatever knowledge you have and then ask ChatGPT, I want to have this task appear at the very top if it's due today or something. And maybe ChatGPT will be able to give you an idea of how you could do that. And even asking ChatGPT for project ideas, I think, might be a good idea, because I've asked it for ideas for other tasks in the past, and it's given me some very, very good responses. So yeah, I think it's a great, almost like a partner, where for like pair programming, that's almost a way of looking at it, where it can be a partner for you to help you as you're building out a project.
I like that. A partner for pair programming, because I think a lot of people, they hear pair programming can be beneficial, but a lot of developers are kind of socially awkward. They don't take the initiative to reach out to other people, and so they have a hard time like getting that pair programming partner that is even on their skill level. And you can literally, honestly, you can probably prompt ChatGPT to like get a little bit above your skill level. You could probably, you could prompt it to give potential. I mean, this wouldn't be beneficial, but like you can really control it. You can prompt it to give you potentially inaccurate answers that you also have to catch, right? And you also have to spot. There's a lot of interesting things that I think you can utilize it for, but I like that. Partner for pair programming. Okay. I think it was a good conversation. Is there anything else you think we should talk about or we're leaving out?
I guess I'll add one last thing. So there's a developer I follow whose name is Josh Como. He has some really good JavaScript and CSS courses on his own platform. And he had actually written an article about ChatGPT and his own take on it. And his perspective is really interesting because we talked about, the two spectrums where there's people who are like doomsday prepping for ChatGPT, and then there's people who are saying it's not going to have any impact. His approach is that ChatGPT is actually going to help there to be even more, software jobs. It's going to open up new opportunities because it's going to maybe shift the focus from certain tasks away and open up other possibilities, other avenues. So yeah, for anyone who's interested, just Google Josh Como ChatGPT, and you can read his article on it. It's a really interesting take.
Okay, cool. I appreciate the recommendation. All right, that's it. That's a wrap. Byron, I appreciate you reaching out. Thank you so much for coming on. So before we do leave, you want to share any socials? Anything else you want to shout out?
Yeah, you can sign up for my to-do app at todo.app. It's a to-do application I created. So yeah, feel free to join. It's free. You don't have to pay anything for it. Oh, yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Anything unique with the app?
Yes. So I've used a lot of to-do apps, and the thing that I was always missing was time tracking. And personally, I've used like Pomodoros in the past, which is basically a 25-minute timer where you are not allowing yourself to be distracted by anything. You're focusing for 25 minutes on a specific task, and you're supposed to just, not look at social media, not look at your phone, just focus on that task. And so I integrated that functionality within my to-dos. So let's say I have, a task called new HTML page, I'm starting a 25-minute session on that task, and I'm going to stay focused for 25 minutes. Once it's done, it'll give me a notification, you completed your session, and it'll keep a log of all of the time that I'm working in a day. So at the end of the day, I'll be able to see, okay, this day I was productive for, 8 or 9 hours. And, it helps you get more productive over time, basically.
Ah, interesting. So the focus is to become more productive, not necessarily capture all of your tasks. Okay. Cool. Well, thanks for sharing. Anyways, yeah, seriously, Byron, this is a good conversation. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.